Alright, running into a problem that a lot of Lance camper owners have run into, and that's I got a new truck. I don't live near a Lance dealer, and Lance tells you in order to put their 6-way proprietary camper plug in the bed of the truck, you need to go to a Lance dealer. And I've called around to E-Trailer, a bunch of different companies, Lance, and got very little direction from anybody. No one makes a harness that's specific to the Lance 6-way. So I've come up with a solution. So the Lance 6-way, a lot of places will tell you to just plug in a 7-way instead of the Lance 6-way, and the reason Lance runs the 6-way is they run this 8-gauge wiring for the 12-volt refrigerator. And then these wires, which I believe are 10-gauge, they run turn signals, tail lights, and see left and right turn signal, tail light, and backup light. And so what I've done is I went to E-Trailer and I purchased the 41-157 bed mount wiring kit, which is designed to be a plug and play wiring kit that would go to a 7-way spade connector. So my plan is to install this plug and play kit, which this end here will go at the bumper end where my truck 7-way is. It's just going to plug in the back of that, and it's going to run along the bumper line up into the fender well, and it's going to tie in into the truck bed right here near the toolbox. Okay, in addition, for the 12-volt 8-gauge black and white wire, which runs the 12-volt refrigeration system, I had to buy this 40-amp fuse kit, which will be on the battery, and I had to buy 2 rolls of 8-gauge wire. So everything you need is this 40-amp kit, 2 rolls of wire, the E-Trailer 41-157 bed mount wiring kit, made by Hopkins, sold at E-Trailer, and your original Lance 6-way. Let's get started. Okay, so this is where I'm underneath the truck, right by the spare tire. And this is the factory OEM 7-way. So this plug and play system is going to tie right into that. There's a tab right here on the top side. And what we're going to do is we're going to just unplug it. There's a little push button right here. I'm going to push that, and that unplugs. This is the 7-way harness by Hopkins. This is going to plug in to the factory OEM, and then this side is going to plug in to the bumper. And I'm trying to figure out how to set the camera up. Okay. Hopefully I don't knock the camera over again. So here's my factory OEM. Again, this came out of the bed, correction, the bumper. The longer portion, the longer of the 2 connections, plugs into that factory OEM plug until it seats, which leaves the short end of the plug, and that plugs in to the bumper. Until it clicks. So now I have the plug and play, and all I got to do is run my harness. Okay, to run the harness, you just find a route that you like. And you get it zip tied up, and there's already existing wiring, so it makes sense just to zip tie it to that existing wiring. It'll go up over the frame in the back here. So I'm just going to feed that up over the frame, bumper mount. Maybe. I'm just going to feed this up over the frame. Okay, now in order to figure out what wires go to what, because the colors don't necessarily match up between the 7-way plug, and the 6-way plug, we're going to use a test light. You buy these for $2-3 at like a Harbor Freight or an Ace Hardware. And all they do, let me set it up and I'll come back. Okay, so I've got my test light. There's my left blinker. There's my tail lights. My auxiliary power. Backup lights are in the center. So everything else is dead. So left blinker is my yellow wire. That yellow wire follows into that lead. That's my left blinker. My brown wire follows into that lead. That's my tail lights. My red wire, which is a larger gauge, is auxiliary power, which I'm not going to need it on this plug. So if you go to the Lance website or your manual for your camper, it tells you the Lance 6-way is set up. So the black is your 12-volt, white is your ground, green is your running or tail lights, red left turn signal, brown right turn signal, and yellow backup. That coincides with the wiring harness and the colors you see. Okay, if you look at the factory 7-way that came in the Hopkins kit, it basically lays out like this. So the center connection is your purple backup lights. The outer right spade top is red auxiliary, which you're not going to need for your Lance camper plug-in. The right is your turn signal, right turn signal, and that's green. The blue is electric brakes, which is the lower right. Not going to need that for your Lance. The white, lower left, is ground. The left side spade is yellow, and that's for your left turn signal. And the top left facing it is your brown wire, which is running tail lights. The way that translates is if I cut the end of my connection that I got, it's hanging out now, I'm going to cut all these wires off and disconnect it from this factory connection. And then I'm going to rewire it using heat shrink butt connectors into these 4 wires. And the translation is like this. So the black and the white off of my Lance is going to go direct to the battery. I'll get to that in a little bit. The green running tail light on the Lance is going to connect to the brown wire on the factory Hopkins connection, because brown is my running tail lights and green is my running tail lights, so green to brown. The red wire on my Lance connection is the left turn signal. Left turn signal on my 7-way is yellow, so red to yellow. the brown is my right turn signal on my lance, and that is going to connect to the green. So brown to green. And then my backup is the yellow wire on the lance, and that's going to go to the purple on the Hopkins connection. Okay, I know from my previous camper, and my previous truck, that I had my lance 6-way mounted kind of in this general direction right here. And so what I need to do is take a hole saw and get that hole, and then I'm going to bore it out with this spade bit. So you want to make sure, I happen to have a dually, but you want to make sure there's nothing in the way. Fuel cap, fuel line. My fuel line is right on the outside here, so I want to make sure I'm clear of that. So just check underneath, find the best location, and drill the hole. Probably want to make sure that you check the length of your plug-in on your Lance camper to make sure it's going to reach. You don't want to put it too far back. A lot of the other campers get plugged in back here, have a long cord, but the Lance plug-in is pretty short, so it needs to be up in the front part of your bed. So that's the initial hole. And now we're just going to bore it out so it's big enough to fit the plug. It's just a step bit. And I just like to clean up the edges with a file. Okay, and when it's all done, you just feed your harness through, and you secure it with a couple screws, and that part's done. Okay, so that's where my 6-way is coming out of the bed. I ran it up over the duals. So I'm kind of right here by my fuel fill area and def tank. And I'll show you where it came out on the back side. Okay, so there's my plug and play. All I did was just zip tie this wire up. I ran it up over the frame. Doesn't really matter where you run it, as long as it's not on any sharp edges. It's got a wire loom on it. Okay, it came out right here. And so now I have both wires coming out right here. This is my 6-way coming from up over the duals. Both wires coming out together. I'm going to splice them together. Okay, so both wires coming out here by the rear tire. This is my Lance 6-way. This is my Hopkins 41157. Plug and play. Again, I'm going to cut this end off. I'm going to cap the blue, the red, and the white because I don't need those. If I ended up needing them at a later time, I could always plug them in, but I don't want to plug my ground in because the ground on the Lance is an 8 gauge. This is more like maybe a 10 gauge. So you don't want to reduce the size of your wire. You want to keep the appropriate side because we're running, I didn't measure how long this Hopkins plug-in, but it's got to be 8-10 feet, and that Lance is probably a solid 8 feet, so we want those to go directly to the battery with 8 gauge. So we're just going to plug in our left and right turn signals, our running lights, and our backup lights. Okay, so I've cut off the plug and play end, and I left some wires sticking through there just so I could always orient it and make sure I'm tying in to the right location, but I already established using a test light that these wires, what they do based on their color. So I'm going to plug them in to my Lance 6-way. Alright, so this is just a heat shrink butt connector kit that I bought off of Amazon. It's a handy kit, use it all the time. I'm going to run those yellow 10 and 12 gauge connections to connect all these wires up. Okay, so I've got the lance side ready to go with this heat shrink. I used the 14-16 gauge connections and they're heat shrink. I just used a standard pair of, these are cheap wire strippers, wire cutters, and you just, pretty self-explanatory, 16-14 gauge. That's where you crimp it. And I have a pair of Klein stripping pliers. You can cut and strip the wires. Use it for Romex or 12-volt wire. Now I'm going to tie into my other side of the plug. Okay, so I know based on the testing that I did that my brown lance ties into my green Hopkins. My green lance ties into my brown Hopkins. My red lance ties into my yellow Hopkins. And my yellow ties into my purple. So now I just heat shrink these. I'm going to wire cap these because I'm not going to use them, and I'm going to tape this loom up, and then I'll run my ground and 12-volt. Okay, I just used a heat gun to heat all these butt connectors up. You can see nice tight connection on all of them, sealed nicely around the wires. I just used a Harbor Freight heat gun. All about Harbor Freight. You can use a torch or a lighter to do that if you need to. Just watch out, you might burn the wires a little bit. Once I tape that up, it'll be good. So now we're going to run our two 8-gauge wires up to the battery. Okay, so this is my fuse kit that I bought. It's got a 40 amp fuse. So these little terminals I'm going to crimp onto the end of my wires. And it'll go together like this. These will screw down. That'll screw on there, and then this is just a protective lid. Comes over the top. Nice and clean. Okay, here's the finished loom at the back of the truck. So I ran this black ground from the battery. It's not on a fuse, and it comes to the white lance 8-gauge wire. I got an 8-gauge butt connector, which I had to go buy, and then the red is the 12-volt butt connector going to the black lance 8-gauge wire. And then I have shrink wrap tubing on both of those. And then the rest of my connections, again, the colors don't match up because they're different harnesses, but we have right turn, tail lights, left turn, backup, and then this is electric brake, auxiliary, ground. I think I mixed up my labels on my auxiliary and ground, so I'll have to fix that. Should be auxiliary red, ground is white. And I'm going to wrap these up in a piece of plastic, and then I'll use electrical tape to secure them all. I'll show you that when it's done. Okay, so I'm just wrapping this up in plastic because I have the wires labeled. That way I don't tear the labels off when if I ever need to get in here and access these wires. Okay, final setup my red coming off my positive terminal of my battery goes over to this 40 amp fuse, which I mounted kind of on this plastic housing. It doesn't have any tension on it. My ground is coming off the negative terminal. They both run behind this fuse box right here and down past the firewall. Okay, so I followed the frame rail from the front of the truck up and over the def tank, and then once I got past the def tank, I went up over the top of the frame rail by the or the bed mount, and then I came up by the fuel port and came out here at the back of behind the rear wheels, and this is where everything got spliced together. And I just kind of secured it to this rear quarter panel mounting bracket. And it comes up, this is that harness that I bought on e-trailer, and then that ties in right there at the bumper. So hopefully everything's working. I'm gonna go test it now.